Welcome to This Week in Morgan County. I'm your host, Russell Mokhiber. Our guest this week is Tom Ambrose. Tom, for 30 years, was with Cacapon State Park, more than 30 years, and for the last 16, he was the superintendent of the park, and he's just retired on October 30. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You grew up, you spent your whole life there pretty much.
Pretty much.
Tell us a little bit about your family, your dad and your mom, and how they ended up there.
Well, my father was one of the original park rangers. He was the ranger there from 1944 until he retired in 1974. And he served in that capacity for approximately 30 years.
How did the park come about? When was it created? What was the genesis of the park?
It's one of the original Civilian Conservation Corps parks, and for those people that aren't familiar with how they were formed, it was formed during the period right after the Great Depression. And President Franklin Roosevelt put it together to provide jobs and training for young men that had been put out of work because of the economy. And they started in I think it was around 1933, 1934. And from that period, they put candidates in the CCC throughout the country, which would later become many of the national parks as well as state parks throughout the country. That's how basically most of our park systems in this country began, was through the New Deal.
And the park it was a federal project to create public spaces?
In conjunction with the state, yes.
In conjunction with the state. And the park was created in what year?
1934. Was the year that it was constructed, and it opened for business in 1937, July 1st.
And your family lived there?
Yes.
Your father was the park ranger, so as a park ranger, the family gets to live there?
Yes, that's one of the, yes.
So you grew up in the park?
Yes.
What was it like growing up in a state park?
It was basically a family affair. I mean, when you were involved in working in a state park, the whole family was involved. My mother, for example, as I mentioned in an article that I was asked recently, she worked as a housekeeper, and oftentimes that was an unpaid position. I mean, when you hired a park ranger, you got two with the work, and sometimes 3 and 4, depending on how many children there were in the family. But it was a very good experience, and it was one of those things that not too many people get to take advantage of. That's for sure.
Well, tell us a little bit about about Cacapon. How many acres? What it offers to the community?
Cacapon is just a little over 6,000 acres, and it offers a great deal for the community, in the sense that it's provided over the years jobs for a lot of the people that live here. And it certainly provides a recreational experience for people that come to this area and from all over the state. And especially because we're near so many other states, we get a lot of visitation from Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. And it's an experience that a lot of people would travel a long ways to participate in.
Mm-hmm. And I was reading some of the articles in the paper about your retirement, and one of the things I noticed was it seems that people in the local community here used to use it a lot more than they do now. Why is that true, and why is that true?
I think it's been sort of like the ebb and flow of the ocean. I think there's been periods when they've used it more, and there have been periods when they've used it less. I think we're back in a trend when we're getting a little bit more day use out of it than we have had in some time. And that's thanks very honestly to the Cacapon State Park Foundation. It's been very active in trying to revive certain parts of the park, such as the picnic area, which has always been a popular spot for people to come during the summer, for their family reunions, their class reunions, and just an outing to enjoy the outdoors.
Mm-hmm. And people are spending a lot of time these days on the internet in front of their computers.
Right.
Has that generally affected visitation at the park, or just generally people being outdoors? Do you see that people more in front of their computer, less outside, enjoying the outdoors?
Not until recently. Recently, I think there seems to be a trend in that design, but we've been pretty steady as far as visitation overall with the lake in the summertime. The picnic area has been very active, and of course our golf course has been active until recently as well. And there is a downtrend in golf as well throughout the country. So the golf course has been affected somewhat by that, but it's still very popular and gets a lot of use. And
also a lot of local people go and fish.
Right.
And there's a lot going on there. You actually, when you were growing up, grew up in the old inn. That was your house?
Briefly. We ended up living in the house that's now the park headquarters. And that's exactly where I was raised, in one corner of the park headquarters.
Tell us about the old inn. Give us a little history of the old inn, because it's recently been renovated.
Right.
And my wife and I recently went and visited it because we're in the area and we're looking for a place for a family reunion.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the history of it.
Well, the old inn was originally the custodian's residence. The custodian was the original superintendent of the park, and he had residence there until they decided that they had a need for overnight lodging, like a hotel or whatever, which they did not have in the park system. They had cabins, but they were rented by the week normally, or by a several-day period. So they decided to add on to the custodian's residence. They did, and they added a restaurant as well as additional rooms, and it became the first overnight lodging facility in the West Virginia park system.
And how many rooms, and what's it used for?
Approximately 12 rooms, and it's used today because the rooms are kind of configured in a way that you share a bath in some rooms. You have a bath in between rooms, and I think today there's 2 private baths in the old inn, but it's used primarily today by groups that are familiar with each other, such as families, family reunions. Golf groups tend to like to use it, and it's basically a very nice atmosphere and environment for people to get together under one roof that are familiar with each other.
And it's booked like far in advance.
It tends to be booked about 5 years in advance.
Right.
For the peak times. That's not Sunday through Thursday, so the Sunday through Thursday is possibilities for openings.
I heard you were instrumental in getting started the Nature Center. What is the Nature Center, and tell us about how it started and what it does.
It's a center where we've collected various items, historical as well as natural history oriented items, to display and provide for the visitors and guests that come to the park. Primarily, of course, the guests to the park, but we've had an outreach that I've been very proud of through our park naturalists. We've reached out to the community and the schools to draw them in, and I think we've served as a resource for the local schools in that regard, as well as people that have an interest in the outdoors.
How many people visit the park every year?
Oh gosh, it's 300,000 plus, I'm sure.
Cacapon State Park?
Yeah.
What percentage of that are golfers?
You got me on that one. I'm not going to give you an inaccurate figure, so I'm not absolutely certain. But
well, pretty much people use the park for golf, fishing. How many cabins do you have?
31.
31 cabins. So if they want to spend a weekend away or a week away, they'll rent a cabin. And how many? And then there's the lodge. And how many rooms are in the lodge?
48 in the main lodge. Yes.
Okay. There's the issue of the expansion of the lodge and the money from the state. This has been a hot issue that's been going on for, what, 5 years now?
It's been for a while.
For a while. What's the issue there? Tell us what the issue is on why that hasn't happened yet.
Basically, the funding is needed, and that's where we are with that. It's on the back burner until they find funding.
And this was a state issue, right? The state said, yes, it's going to happen, then it didn't happen?
Well, I can't get into particulars about it because I feel like I'm on the outside now since I've retired. But I think it's a project that is still very popular and they want to have done. It's just a matter of finding the appropriate funding, and that's always an issue with these projects.
There is a debate in the public. I mean, well, you hear a lot in politics about privatizing the public sphere. You know, there's this drive to privatize, and there's even a drive to privatize public parks or to commercialize them, to charge money, to have advertising. What's your sense on commercialization or privatization of public parks?
Well, the West Virginia park system has been one of the systems that has been very resistant to charging entrance fees as such. And so it does not cost people to come into West Virginia State Park at this point.
You can drive right up to Cacapon State Park. There's not a barrier there.
There is a barrier there because the park is closed after 10 p.m. and
okay.
we secure it it's open from 6 in the morning until 10 at night.
But I mean, there's not a booth there with people collecting money. You
not.
Just drive right in when it's open. And are there parks in the state park system where people charge or no?
There's one park that does.
And is that an individual decision that a superintendent can make or no?
No, it has to be done by the main office.
Okay. So it's open, it's free, and except, well, I mean, like when you go swimming.
There are fees for different things that you use, such as swimming, golf, and horseback riding. Of course, horseback riding is a concession. That's rented to by a concessionaire.
Okay. Let's talk about the West Virginia park system a little bit. How many parks are there?
Approximately 35.
Okay. And how many parks are there in this area competing with Cacapon State Park?
Public parks?
Public parks, yeah. Well, there's Berkeley Springs State Park.
There's Berkeley, as far as state parks go, there's just two, Berkeley Springs State Park and Cacapon State Park.
Okay. What about the idea of expanding Cacapon? I mean, there was some talk, for example, that, Coolfont didn't work out. When Coolfont went down, it was a hit to the economy.
Absolutely.
And, there was some thought that why not expand Cacapon into Coolfont and, so it becomes part of Cacapon State Park. What about that idea?
I think you have to take into consideration the economy of the situation. I mean, whenever you add new things to a park system, you're adding more maintenance fees and things of that nature that have to be taken care of as well. So a lot of different things have to be taken into consideration before you add new additions to parks or whatever. You need to have a resource to maintain them as well.
Okay. How, Cacapon State Park is one of the major employers in Morgan County, is that correct?
I think it might be.
What is it, like 3 or 4?
I'm not exactly sure.
Do you know how many people are employed at the park?
It depends on the season, but over 100.
Over 100 people.
Yeah.
So it's probably second to the school system or something like that.
I wouldn't have any knowledge of that,
okay.
But how many people they hire.
All right. Tell us about when you go to the state park. I mean, the golf course is. I've heard that people regularly come from Canada to play golf at Cacapon State Park. Tell us about the golf course and its draw.
They do, and they tend to come in a sort of trip that includes also hitting further south to Carolinas, and maybe even as far as south, I guess, as Florida. But they do travel, and they use this as a stop off on the way.
So it's like they go on like golfing
like
adventures?
Golf, right, like a golf adventure.
And Cacapon State Park is like one of their stops?
Probably one of the first stops on the way.
Okay. The Cacapon State Park Foundation, you were instrumental in starting that, correct?
I was.
And tell us why you thought that was necessary to start a foundation, or why that came about.
There's always a need for funding, and there's always a need to advance projects. And it was an opportunity to draw the community. It was one of the things that I was interested in doing and trying to draw the community back to the park, was to get community participation. And so we formed a foundation which was being kind of directed by our main office at that time when it happened, which was in 1989. We put it together, and we were able to get a really good group of people together that were interested in promoting the park and in providing a resource for the community, and in trying to draw them back. And we were able to do that through various means, such as upgrading things in the picnic area. The Nature Center was built. We have a gazebo that was built, which with the thought in mind of making it an entertainment center, and that was placed in the center of the picnic area, which was originally the centerpiece for the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 30s. And we were able to raise interest through an event we had Labor Day Sunday of every year, where we invited people back to the park, which was a homecoming. We started that in conjunction with Governor Gaston Caperton's homecoming event in 1996. And we were able to continue that, and as a result, we've been having very good participation by the local community.
And that was like Cacapon State Park Day or something like that, where people go for Labor
Come
Day.
home to your park. In 1996, it was begun as a homecoming event for everybody to come back. And even to this day, we get people that come back that have been participants in the Civilian Conservation Corps. This past September, there was one individual that did show up that was a member.
You spent your life there, and now you're no longer there.
Right.
Is that like an out-of-body experience? I mean, how does that feel?
It's surreal. It's surreal. It's a different feeling, that's for sure.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you, and thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks for having me.